Hey guys, in this video I'll show you how to create a double exposure photograph. So just like the name, you're going to need two photos to make up the end product. The first one's going to be a portrait and the second one will be a landscape. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be a landscape, but I think that you'll like the results from something like that, but feel free to experiment with other kinds of things. So right now we'll get into this shooting portion for this, so let's get started. So I'm going to be the photographer and the subject for this photo just because I'm stuck alone at home. The easiest thing would just be to have a friend help you out with this kind of thing, but if you're also stuck at home, or if you just don't have any friends for whatever reason, you can set up something kind of like I have here. So you can see I've got the tripod. I also have a shutter release, so I can just click the button on my remote whenever I want to click a picture. So if we turn around here, you can also see that I'm standing in front of the window. So this is for a couple of reasons. The first reason is just that I think we'll get a better lighting effect when we set up this way. The lighting will be more dramatic than having the light shining directly on the subject. And second of all, it'll just be a lot easier to cut out the subject when we're working in Photoshop. So you'll see what I mean in a little bit. Let's switch back over here. And let's take a look at the way that we're going to set the subject up. So this is what we're seeing in camera. You can see that the background is quite overexposed, and I did this for a few reasons. First of all, it makes it a lot easier to separate the subject from the background, and secondly, we'll have a lot more light on the subject's face, otherwise this would be a silhouette. Right now I'm standing sideways. We'll see later on in the editing portion that this is going to be the easiest way to pull this effect off, and I'm just clicking a few photos in a number of poses. Okay, so before we start, I just want to show you why we shot in front of the window as opposed to opposite the light coming in the window. This is basically what we'll get if we shoot opposite the window. It's a decently taken photo, but you can tell that there's not really much dramatic light on my face. If we switch to the one in front of the photo, obviously this is too dark. We can bring up the shadows, but there's a bit of an issue with the colors here, but still you can tell that if we switch back and forth here that the light is much more dramatic from the second photo. So if we set this back to its original, come here and look at the base, basically what we need to do is just increase the exposure on this. So here is what we got after increasing the exposure by about 2 stops. This is with 0 editing. Still, I think it's a bit too bright in some areas. You can see up here that there's some light coming in and hitting my head, and it's also too dark in other areas like the sleeves, but it's much more dramatic than having that flat light just from standing opposite the window. So let's work on this file. The first thing I want to do actually is just fix this highlight on my head. You can see that the light from outside the window is spilling in a little bit too much, so I might just pull down the exposure a tiny bit, and I might pull down the highlights a little bit as well. We still have enough contrast that it will be really easy to cut out the subject when we do this in Photoshop later. Let's start boosting the shadows then. Something like that looks pretty good. I might pull down the whites quite a bit. And let's see if I zoom in here, let's see what happens if I boost the blacks. I think I might even pull them down. It will add a bit more drama to this. So that looks pretty good to me. Let's play with the contrast a bit as well. A little bit of contrast looks nice. Now that's looking like it's darkening the shadows a bit too much, so I'll pull these up a little bit more. And I think that's good. Clarity will pull out the details in the midtones. So in my face, I have a lot of midtones. So you can see what we're doing there, and I think that looks pretty good. I don't want to go too much here, but I think that it looks good around 45-50. Let's see. I might decrease the vibrance just to make this a bit more muted and dramatic. Later on, we're going to play around with this and make it black and white, so this won't have too much of an effect, but I do like the way this looks. For now, I think that's pretty good, so let's bring this into Photoshop. I'll just right-click on the file, go to Export, Export. If you want, you can put it in a subfolder. I'm going to do that, a temporary subfolder. I'll rename this to Double Exposure. And I want to make sure this is a PSD or Photoshop file. And I also, for now I'm going to work in 8 bits just so that my computer doesn't lag, but you might want to do 16 bits, it will be higher resolution. And I'll click here and I want to open directly into Photoshop. So I'll export that now. And up here it's exporting. This might take a few moments. All right, so here we go. The first thing I'll do is unlock this layer so that we can work on it. And I'll crop this I'm going to probably put this on Instagram, so I'll use a crop of 1080 by 1350. And we can just, I think that looks all right the way it is already, so I'll just hit enter to select it. The next thing we want to do is zoom in here. You can zoom in by hitting Command plus on Mac or Control plus on Windows. And I want to select myself without selecting anything else around this. The easiest way to do this is going to be with the magic wand or the quick selection tool. So this is W on the keyboard. I'm using the quick selection tool. So if we zoom in here, I'm going to make this a bit bigger with the right square bracket key, smaller with the left square bracket key, but I'll choose something around this side, and you want to make sure that you have the plus icon checked right here. So with that done, I'm just going to drag around and it should do a pretty good job cutting this out for me. I want to get all the clothing as well. So I've stopped my selection for now. It's trying to select everything the best it can. And since there's a lot of contrast between me and the background, it should be really easy to do. But I still haven't selected anything down here. If we want to add to the selection, we'll hold down Shift, and you can see that we'll just continue with what we did before. So I've gotten most of it now. But we do need to fine-tune some areas, so I'm just going to zoom in here. I'll make this a bit smaller, and I'll hold down Shift and add to it. It's cleaning up the edges there. There's some issues in here as well. So I'm going to fix this in much quicker speed in just a bit, but let's just look around the edges and see if we have any issues. Looks pretty good for the most part. There's a few small problems here. Right here, we can add that in. Right here, we can add a bit more. And right here as well. All right, overall it's pretty good. If you ever need to get rid of part of the selection, you can hold down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows. You can see if I start to hit that, pay attention to the plus icon in the middle of the circle, that will become a minus. So if I want to take out this little logo here, I can do that by holding down Option or Alt. And now that's no longer part of my selection. In this case, I don't want to do that though. So the selection's pretty good. I'm just going to speed this up and take care of some of the edges. You can do this with the quick selection tool. I'm going to use this polygonal lasso tool. So when I click, I'm going to hold down Shift. You can see I've got a plus when I do that. I'll zoom in really tight here, and I'll just add in this little edge of the jacket really quickly. So holding down Shift when you click will add to the selection, and holding down Alt or Option will take away from the selection. So I'll speed this up and I'll see you in just a bit. All right, we're back. Another way that we can deal with some of these edges is with a tool called Select and Mask. This is a new tool that took the place of something else in Photoshop, but it's really, really handy for dealing with edges like this. Or if you're trying to cut out hair or something like that, it can be a really big challenge, but with this tool, it becomes much easier. So with everything selected, you can tell it's selected because we have these marching ants running along the outside. We'll click Select and Mask. You can set your transparency here. In this mode, I'm using the onion skin mode. And if we play around with transparency, this will depend on how much we can see the background. So I'll keep this somewhere high. And I'm just going to start painting along the outside. You'll want to have this tool here selected, Refine Edge Brush. So if I start painting along the outside, it'll begin to pick up some of the loose fibers and add them to the selection. So I'll just do this around the edge of the hat. I think the other parts of this are pretty good overall, but this will just fix that edge for us a little bit. All right, so I think that's pretty good. I'll hit OK. And with what we have here, I'm going to hit Command J. That will be Control J on Windows. And you can see if we turn off this bottom layer, we've cut out the subject and we have a transparent background. If I hold down Command or Control and click on this layer, it will select everything that we have here. With that selected, I'm going to click on this mask button. So that will create a mask of me. If we hold down Option or Alt and click on the mask, we can come in here and find out if there's any areas that we missed, but overall it looks pretty good to me. So let's zoom back out. I'll hold down Option or Alt and click on this one more time. And the next step is going to be to click on this bottom layer and add an adjustment layer. We'll go to Solid Color and choose White. So now I've got a white background behind me. Let's rename some of these things. We'll call this one Base. We'll call this one White Fill. And we'll call this one Mask. The next thing we'll want to do is make this black and white. So on top of this layer, we'll click on the top one, go to Adjustment Layers, and go to Black and White. Now if we can play around with the colors to mess around with the way that this looks, but I'm just going to choose one of our presets. The one that I like is infrared, but feel free to play around with the other ones and see what you like best. I'm also going to add something called a clipping mask. I'll explain this more in a little bit, but basically if we hold down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and hover in between these two layers, we can click, and basically what this will do is apply this black and white to only the areas that are affected by the mask. Right now pretty much everything is affected by the mask. Since the background is white anyway, it won't be adjusted by a black and white layer, but we'll need this later on. So now that we're on this top layer, I'll choose a new layer and go to Curves. We can just play with this to make my skin or my jacket a little bit lighter or darker. I think that this effect will look better if my skin's a little bit lighter, so I'll just pull this up a little bit. That looks good. And again, I'm going to hold down Option on my Mac or Alt on Windows and create a clipping mask, clipping this to this layer, which is clipped to this mask. The next step will show why we need to do this. So now I'm going to minimize this and come down to my desktop. I've got this file of star trails that were shot at Mount Bromo, and this is what I'm going to use as my landscape photo. So I'm just going to drag this into Photoshop, and I'll hit OK. Let's bring this file into the base file that we already have. In order to do this, I'll recommend a hotkey combination that's useful to remember. So I'm going to hit Command A on my Mac to select all, Command C to copy, Command W to close, and Command V. I'll hit OK again and paste this right on top. It's a bit smaller than our base image, but that's okay. If you want to copy on Windows, that will be Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control W to close, and Control V to paste in the new file. So let's hit V on the keyboard. We can just move this layer around. I'll put it somewhere up here for now, and I'm going to add a mask. Now if I click on the layer again, I'll hold down Option or Alt, and now you can see this is why we need the clipping mask. What we're doing is containing this to the boundaries of this mask down below, because we're clipping this to this layer, clipping this to this layer, and clipping this to the mask. So if we hit V, that will activate our move tool, and we can just move this around and put it where we want it. Somewhere around there looks pretty good for me. So now let's go to the mask. I'll rename this Stars, and I'll zoom in here. This is where things get interesting. We have a white mask, and I want to start painting this back so that we bring in parts of the face. I'll hit B, and I want to do this with a very soft brush, so I'll bring hardness to 0, and I'll make my brush larger by hitting the right bracket key. I want to make sure that I'm painting with a black color, and so if you're not, you can hit X on the keyboard to toggle, and I'll just start painting in here. I'm just kind of doing some dabs. I'll zoom in to be more precise. You can start painting back areas really selectively. But mainly you want to pay attention to the features. This is why we shot this photo facing to the side, because the features would be in the middle if you were looking directly at the camera. It looks a lot better this way. I'm just going to paint around the edge, but feel free to do this however you want. but I feel painting around the edge will frame in the landscape a little bit more. So down here we've got a harsh transition. I'm just going to limit this to my skin and not to my jacket. So I'll make this a bit harder, maybe around 50, 45, 50, and I'll try and keep this off the jacket and only on the skin. So again, painting with a black brush, and doing this with a soft brush will allow us to fade this out and have some kind of transition. So here I'm starting to mess up, but that's okay. It's off the jacket now, so we can change to a white brush by hitting X. You can see I'm toggling back and forth. And we just want to include this everywhere except for the jacket. That's pretty good. So let's come back out here, and I think that looks pretty nice. Maybe you want to add it a little bit more in some places. If we want to reveal the face, we'll use a black brush. If we want to reveal the jacket, we'll use a white brush. I mean the landscape, we'll use a white brush. So I think that's pretty good. Yeah, that looks good to me. So right now I feel that the color in this landscape photo is a bit too vibrant. So I might just add another adjustment layer, vibrance, and I'll bring this down a bit. This won't affect the other parts of the photo because they're already completely desaturated. They're black and white. Something like that's pretty good for me. And that's basically it. If we want to add a few other adjustments, there's other things that we can do here. You can see on our black and white layer, if we start painting black on this mask, we can bring back the jacket, or you could start bringing back skin or something like that. So I think this looks pretty good if we start bringing the jacket back. So let's do that. Again, I'm using a large soft brush. If we hit Command 0 or Control 0, we'll zoom back out, and I think this is our final image for now. So hopefully after watching that, you guys have a pretty good idea of how to pull off a double exposure on your own. If you want to try with the files that I've taken and you don't have your own files to use, you can get those down below. I also want to mention that we're organizing weekly photo events and weekly photo contests. So if you're interested in joining that and you haven't already heard about it, check down below and you can join one of the 2 groups that we're organizing. So with that said, thanks again for watching, and I'll hope to see you next time.